All right, so we are ninth grade, and we're working through Song of Roland on page 128. Oliver's been stabbed, and I'll start at the third line. He's bled so much that his eyes are all glazed. So far or near, he can see nothing straight or recognize a single living shape. Now, notice that. He cannot see very well. So when he comes to where his comrade waits, on the gold helm, now the comrade would be Oliver, who's also been wounded. Roland is just tired. So when he comes to where his comrade waits on the gold helm, he smites him amain. Now to the nasal he splits the jeweled plates, only his head is touched by the blade. So this is actually Oliver, who comes upon Roland and strikes him with his sword and breaks his helmet. He thought they were good friends, right? He cuts through Roland's helmet. So he hits Roland so hard that it breaks the helmet. Only his head is not touched by the blade. Then Roland, stricken, lifts his eyes to his face, asking him low and mildly. Now Roland's response to his friend trying to kill him is this: "Sir, my companion, did you mean it that way? Look, I am Roland that loved you all my days. You never sent me challenge or battle gaze." He said, "Yeah, this is not how you do it. I've been your best friend all your life. And by the way, you didn't even challenge me. And if you're going to do it by the laws of chivalry, you have to issue a challenge. And I know you're coming. I didn't know you were coming." Quoth Oliver, "I cannot see you plain. I know your voice. May God see you and save. And I have struck you. Pardon me, I pray."
So he just didn't see him.
He didn't see him. Remember, his eyes were.
How do you kill so many people that affects your eyesight?
Well, he's bleeding, and he's bleeding. He's got, sweat. Roland replies, "I have taken no scathe." In other words, you didn't hurt me. Remember, nothing hurts Roland except for what's the one thing that injured him? And that's kind of ironic. "I pardon you myself and in God's name." Then each to the other bows courteous in his place. With such great love, thus is their parting made. Why don't we go, any volunteers to read? All right, we'll go to Catherine, number 150.
Oliver feels the coming page of death. Both of his eyes are turning in his head. Now he is blind, wholly and totally deaf. He lights from horse, and to his knees he gets, and makes confession aloud, and beats his breast. Then claps his hands and lifts them up to heaven. In paradise he prays, God give him rest. In France the fair, in Carlin prays, him bless. And his companion Roland above all men. His heart strikes strings, crack. He stoops his nightly home, and sinks to earth, and lies there all his life. Dead is the count. His days have reached their end. The valley Roland weeps for him and laments. No man on earth felt ever such distress.
So I would make a note of that. I'd circle it, underline it. The count is dead. That is Oliver. Let's see. Who would like to read? All right. Neil, would you read 151?
When Roland sees his friend and comrade die, and on the ground face down beholds him lie, with tender words he bids him thus goodbye. "Sir, my companion, well worth your valiant my eye. Long years and days have we lived side by side. Near this you wrong me or nor suffer wrong of mine." Having thus said, and
Yes.
soon outright on his steed back, that relative is height. He's kept from falling by the gold stirrups bright. Go as he may, they hold him still upright, or ever Roland comes to himself again.
Okay, no, that's good. I heard an interesting thing. I think I'm right about this. I've heard this before, that sometimes the English will mispronounce purposely French words. Like, I think normally we would say marquis, right? Marquis. But the English, you'll hear it in movies when they do it, they'll say marquis. I'm not I just don't think that's how the French pronounce it. I think the English are always making fun of the French. Here's another example. This really isn't making fun of it. You ever heard, what is a lieutenant? You know the rank of lieutenant? You can get police lieutenants. Lieutenants are in the Navy, lieutenants in all the branches. It's a what we call commissioned officer. He's an officer, right? Well, the British pronounce it lieutenant. Have you ever seen a movie where they'll talk about the lieutenant, L-E-F, lieutenant? I heard two explanations for that. One is that it's just simply a mispronunciation of the lieu, L-I-E-U. That word literally means in the place of. So lieutenant is like a substitute. Initially, that's what the word meant. But the British either couldn't say it or purposely missaid it, so they would say lieutenant. The other one is more interesting, is that sometimes an officer would stand on the left side, let's see, that would be this side, of a higher ranking officer, and in order to protect his left side, because he would use his right arm to fight, and so his left side is vulnerable, and that was what the lieutenant was supposed to protect. I love, if you look into the history of words, they're fascinating, but I kept hearing lieutenant. Why do they always say that? Those are two explanations of it. So we need to look at 152. How about, we'll go to Owen, and it shows you kind of what's left. Now that Oliver is dead, how many are we talking about?
Or ever Roland comes to himself again, and he has recovered and rallied from his fate. Fearful disaster his fortunes have sustained. All of the French are lost to him and slain. So the Archbishop and Walter come remain.
Okay, let's go back. There are three people left. Roland, S-O-L-E, means him, like it's a reference to him. The Archbishop, Turpin, and Walter Hum. Those are the last three French remaining at Roncevaux at the battle. And you can keep reading.
Walter has come down from the heights again, well has he striven against the men of Spain. His men are dead, bound by the chain of blade. Will he or no he flees towards the vale. And upon Roland he cries aloud for aid. Where art thou, where, great country, warrior brave? While thou wast there, I was never dismayed. Walter am I, who now he overcame. Nephew am I, to dream white with age. Thou for my valor waste, wont to love my aid. My lance is shattered, my shield is split in twain, battered and broken as my helmet is nailed. A spear has pierced me through the midst of my reign. Death is upon me, yet here I made him pay. Lo, at the word, Roland hears him and waits, as he spurs his horse and comes to him in haste.
All right, so that's the situation we're in. There are three of them left, and there's still a whole bunch of the enemy. So we're going to skip 153.
Mr. Powell.
Yeah.
How did they, if they're only, well, I guess two of them left now, but, how are they're, having, full conversations and, grieving, and what about the enemy that's, it's only two of them left?
Yeah, there's something that in literature and in any kind of literature and watching movies, we call it the suspension of disbelief. It's the idea when you go into a movie, it's just I can't get my mind off that screen right there. I know that's just, see the guy with the knife, he's just an actor, this is stupid. We don't do that. We go in there and we admit it's a movie. Strange things happen to me. It's not real, but we pretend that it's real. And the same thing happens with literature, and Shakespeare's the same way. A lot of talking going on in the middle of a battle. It's not reality, it's literature. And so you just have to accept the fact that, okay, this isn't a real, it may be an interesting story, and it sometimes feels real, but it's still literature, and so you just have to allow for those kinds of things. That wouldn't really happen in real life. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Yeah.
Can I get some water?
Sure. All right, so we're skipping number 154. I should point out there are numbers here that, I don't know how many of the enemy is left, but there are numbers 1,000 are attacking the three of them, and another number is 40,000. The numbers are irrelevant, really. They're outnumbered, incredibly. Those three guys cannot be alive much longer. 155, we're going to skip. I think this is interesting. You can write this in the margin if you want to. Turpin has 4 spears in it. And he makes this comment, "I'm not beaten yet." It's like, come on, give up. Do you ever quit? He's got these 4 spears sticking out of him, and he's still fighting. Turpin, yeah.
Is that part of the epic as well? Because
Yes.
you can't lose the
Yes.
spears in you. Do you put this in the margin of what last name?
It's actually 155. He makes that comment. I am not beaten yet. He is beaten, but he refuses to admit it. And I like that attitude.
Imagine you have 4 spears though, and you just kept standing up. Like, that'd be crazy.
They're probably like, this, why? I don't want to spear him.
You'd
If
be
I'm
a
the one
martyr.
shooting her, I'd be, okay, can you just like give up? Because my ego is hurting real bad. Because I already have.
Well, what greater revenge? You're going to die, but you refuse to die easily. I mean, that's the only thing you've got. I'm selling my body dearly. I'm going to get as many of you guys. One thing I admire about the Marines, they refuse to lose. Doesn't matter what situation they're in. You read stories about different wars. The Marines never gave up. In Korean War, the enemy, when they found that the Marines were over there, they didn't want to fight them because those are Marines. Those guys, they're beasts out here. I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they instill that ferocity in it, but I admire it, and I'm sure glad they're on our side. And they may be your brothers, maybe your cousins, your relatives. You go into the Marines, you'll learn to fight, and you won't quit. And that's the kind of that's kind of army, that's kind of military you want to have. Look at number 156. Let's skip that one. 157. I just should point out there are only 2 left now. Walter Hum died, and so there are only 2 left.
Turpin?
Turpin is left, and Roland is left.
Turpin's about to die. Just die.
Yes.
Just die.
Turpin's still not dead. All right, so turn to 157. I mean, we're skipping 157. Are we going to skip 158? You see how the author has just kind of prolonged this thing. We realize that 159, we're going to skip. Go ahead and write in the margin, though, Turpin and Roland, the only 2 left, if you haven't done that. All right, let's read 160. Who wants to read? Anybody? All right, Anna Grace, and we'll go to Celeste. So you read 160. Now remember, there are 2 left, and there's still thousands of Saracens left. But this battle is going to come to an end in just 2 pages. So she'll read it 160. The battle. There's still more to go, but there's this particular battle.
The Paynims say, why were we ever born? Woe worth the while, our day of doom has dawned. Now have we lost our peerage and our lords. The mighty Carlin comes on in all his force. Of those of France we hear the shrilling horns. The cry, Mount Joy, sounds fearfully abroad. So grim of mood is Roland and his wrath. No man alive can put him to the sword. Let fly at him, and then give up the war. So they let fly. Spears, lances, they outpour. Darts and jeers and feathered shafts galore. The shield of Roland is pierced and split and scored. The mail rings riven and all his hauberk torn. Yet in his body he is not touched at all. Though under him, with 30 wounds and more, his
That's his horse.
is stricken dead and falls. The Paynims flee, abandoning the war. Count Roland's left amid the field, unhorsed.
All right, so technically the battle is over, right? And I just point out that it emphasizes the fact that Roland has no wounds in it, except for the ones he caused himself. I'm trying to see if the bishop he's not dead yet. The bishop is still alive. So I said the battle is over, and how do we know it's a battle? I guess we know it's over.
They said they fled.
Who's fled?
The Paynims.
All right, so how do you determine who wins a battle?
The ones who
The ones
The
who have
first
the
one
most
who
people left.
surrendered.
Well, that would be
The
one.
ones who have the
indicator.
most people left.
Well, that's not how it's determined. I mean, that would.
Do it like a head-to-head off and like on the one side?
First thing you get to the land.
Coin flip?
Yeah, a battle is won, typically, not always, a battle is won by determining which army holds the field of battle when it's over.
What do you mean holds the
Okay.
field?
Let me give you an example. Who won the Battle of Guilford Courthouse?
Give them
I don't know.
privacy.
We did.
No.
The
General
American.
Green.
No,
The British with
the British
this-
did.
Oh, yeah,
It was
General
kind of
Green.
complicated because both sides lost so many men, it didn't really
It-
feel like a victory.
You're right, but technically, it
Wait,
goes
so
down.
why
as-
are we here?
Technically, it goes down as a British victory. And why does it go down as a British victory? Because General Greene retreated. He left the field. He abandoned the field after the battle. However, Cornwallis lost so many men that the very next day, he abandoned the field, right out here, and he marched to Wilmington and sailed to Yorktown. And the battle, Yorktown was the last battle of the American Revolution. But technically, it was an American defeat and a British victory. But there's a word called Pyrrhic victory. It was a victory so costly that it was like a defeat. So there are other ways, like you could say, one army could just simply surrender to the other, but a technical way to determine who wins a battle is who holds the field of battle. Which army retreats? At Gettysburg, Lee retreated. And so the Union Army won that battle. That's typically how we determine who wins a battle. The Paynims, even though they outnumber the French now, 40,000 to 2, or maybe 100,000 to 2, whatever the number is, they still lost because they retreated.
Wait, why do we have all those memorials if we lost?
Because so many people died.
We
Well, not like
won the
memorials,
war.
but we have like.
We won the war, and we honor people who gave their
That's why
lives.
you're here.
That's right. We honor people who gave their lives.
No,
and-
no, I know that. I understand that. I just didn't know if we made a big deal out of it if we lost, because we think if we lost,
But-
we would kind of like.
Well, it's just to represent the
It's a
dead.
technical loss, but it was a great, actually, it was a great moral victory because we actually killed more of the English than we lost. And so it deprived the English of troops that they couldn't afford. Remember, they're thousands of miles away from England, more troops, and just like, they're like the French here. They didn't have the numbers ultimately that could sustain
Didn't they march right down Windover and Battleground?
that area. Yeah, that's why we call it, Battleground and New Garden. New Garden runs right. New Garden existed in 1782. New Garden, maybe not in the same location. And the battle, by the way, is a lot bigger than what that road that runs around. That was not the extent of the battle. The battle was probably a lot bigger. We live near the Lowe's there on Battleground. It's a good chance that even if the battle didn't extend that far, there were British troops or American troops in our neighborhood. I've never found any
Where's the
relics.
nearest like base to Israel? Like
Base?
military base?
You mean currently?
Yeah.
Well, Fort Bragg is in Fayetteville, probably, but you can also go to Havelock, where Cherry Point, a Marine Air Base, and Lejeune, they now call it, Camp Lejeune is there. So you got Marines and Army in North Carolina, and Seymour Johnson is in Goldsboro. That's an Air Force. And you have Coast Guard along the coast. The Navy is in Norfolk, up in Virginia. That's the closest, and Charleston. We don't have any naval base. in North Carolina.
Did we answer number 54?
What's that?
We're surrounded by naval.
Yeah, South Carolina and Virginia have the naval facilities. We got the Marines, the Air Force, and the Army. 82nd Airborne is in Fort Bragg. Every base has one major group that is housed there, plus lots of recruits come in there and are trained. All right, let's read 161.
In wrath and grief away the pagans fly, backward display and headlong haste they hide. The country Roland cannot pursue their flight. Valentif's lost, he has no steed to ride. Will he or no he must of foot abide. He's turned to aid Archbishop Turpin's plight, and from his head the gilded helm untied, stripped off the hauberk of subtle rings and bright, and all to pieces has cut the fine, wherewith to bandage his wounds that gape so wide. Then to his breast he clasps and lifts him light, and gently lays him upon the green hillside. With fair soft speech entreating on this wise, ah, noble sir, pray give me leave a while. These friends of ours, we love so well on life, we must not leave them thus lying where they die. I will go seek them, find and identify, and lay them here tonight together in your sight. Go and return, and the bishop makes reply. Thanks be to God, this field is yours and mine.
That's what he means by this field is yours and mine. These two guys, they refuse to die, and because they still hold the field, technically, and the enemy is retreated, they make the French the winners. Turpin is still alive, but he's dying. And Roland is now going to go find the peers and bury them. He's not so interested in all the other guys. It's the peers he's most interested in. So we're going to skip 162. And I'm going to give us some time to go over questions here in a minute. We're going to skip 163. He finds the body of Oliver. We're going to skip 164. All through this, Roland, although he's technically not wounded except for what he did for himself, he keeps fainting. And so I heard somebody talk about how exhausted he must be. That's a good explanation for it. All right, let's read 165. Yeah.
When the Archbishop saw Roland faint and fallen, so sad was he never had been more so. He reaches out, he's taken Roland a horn up, and Roncesvalles there runs a stream of water. Fain would he go there and fetch a little for him. With feeble steps he turns him thither faltering. He is so weak that he cannot go forward. For loss of blood he has no strength to call on. Ere one might cover but a root's length in walking. His heart has failed him. He has fallen face foremost. The pangs of death have seized him with great.
All right. So interestingly enough, Roland fainted. Turpin is still not dead. He gets up and he walks to a body of water, pond or something, to get some water for Roland, and there he dies. He finally dies, Turpin. So Turpin dies in 165. We're going to skip 166. I'm trying to get to, and we may not get to it,
Turpin
the
died.
death of, yes,
By what?
next to it.